Hello and welcome to Jane Doe's Dark Secrets, the true crime podcast where we delve into the most chilling and mysterious cases from around the world. I'm your host Jane, and each week join me as we uncover the truth behind these gripping stories, explore the minds of those who commit heinous acts and seek justice for the victims. In today's episode, we explore the chilling story of Anatoly Moskvin, a Russian historian whose macabre obsession with death led to one of the most disturbing cases in modern forensic history. Anatoly Moskvin was a brilliant yet eccentric academic who was known for his extensive knowledge of cemeteries and burial rituals. However, his fascination with the dead took a horrifying turn when he began to exhume the bodies of young girls and mummifying them in his apartment. He disguised the bodies as life-size dolls, and the mummified remains were discovered in 2011, shocking the world and raising questions about the thin line between genius and madness. I will warn you, those who are watching as a video on Spotify or YouTube, I have included some of the photos of the quote human dolls, and they are extremely disturbing to look at, so you might just want to listen and not watch instead. So a bit of background to the location of today's case. Anatoly Moskvin was born in the city of Gorky, which is now known as Nizhny Novgorod in Russia. Apologies for my pronunciation. So Novgorod is the sixth largest city in Russia with over 1 million residents. The city is historic, known for its rich cultural heritage. The city boasts numerous historical landmarks, including a fortress that dates back to the 16th century. The city is a significant cultural, economic and educational hub in Russia. It is home to several universities, theatres and museums, making it a vibrant place for both residents and visitors. Despite its historical and cultural significance, Novgorod has faced challenges related to crime, although it remains relatively safe compared to other major cities. The city is considered safe for both residents and tourists. Common concerns include property crime such as vandalism and theft, but these are generally at low levels. Violent crime, including assault and armed robbery, are reported to also be low. Overall, Novgorod is a city of rich history and relatively low crime, making it a fascinating and generally safe place to explore. So let's look at Anatoly Moskvin. In 1966, Elvira and Yuri Moskvin welcomed their son Anatoly into the world. Anatoly was a good student and started his childhood happily. However, in 1974, as a third grader, he was walking home from school when he was grabbed and subsequently raped by a strange man. He never told anyone until he was in his 50s, and even with this secret, he continued to excel in school but became quite secluded. As a schoolboy, Moskvin began wandering through the cemeteries with friends, particularly the cemetery in the city's Linsky district. In an article written shortly before his arrest, he attributed his interest in the dead to a childhood incident in which he witnessed a funeral procession for an 11-year-old girl. Moskvin alleged that the participants forced him to kiss the girl's dead face, writing that an adult pushed my face down to the waxy forehead of the girl in an embroidered cap, and there was nothing I could do but kiss her as ordered. The weeks after this incident were plagued by nightmares of the dead girl called Natasha, telling Anatoly that he needed to learn black magic to raise her from the grave. He tried a few rituals that were meant to keep her spirit from speaking to him, and eventually the nightmares faded. But Anatoly Moskvin's interest in the macabre had just begun. After graduating from Moscow State University, Moskvin became well known in the academic circles. His main areas of academic interests were in the Celtic history and folklore, as well as languages and linguistics. Moskvin had a deep interest in cemeteries and burial rituals, death and the occult. He kept a personal library of over 60,000 books and documents, as well as a large doll collection. Fellow academics described Moskvin as both genius and an eccentric. Moskvin's academic journey was influenced by several notable figures, although specific mentors were not widely documented. During his time at Moscow State University, he was surrounded by esteemed scholars and collaborated with fellow academics such as Oleg Ryabov, who commissioned him to document and list the names of the deceased in over 700 cemeteries across Novgorod. This project allowed Moskvin to immerse himself further in his research and likely provided him with valuable academic guidance and support. Moskvin was fluent in 13 languages, which showcases his exceptional linguistic abilities, and he also served as a lecturer in Celtic Studies at Novgorod Linguistic University and in the Institute of Foreign Languages. As an adult, Moskvin led a secluded life. He never married, preferring to live with his parents, and he abstained from drinking alcohol and smoking. He did have one romantic relationship in 2003 when he fell in love with a woman named Yela. She was fine with a non-sexual relationship, but she did want to have children. At the time in Russia, non-married couples were unable to adopt, and this ultimately led to her leaving Moskvin. In 2006, Moskvin was commissioned to catalogue and document all of the cemeteries, as I said earlier, and he travelled on foot, walking up to 20 miles per day, and was often stopped by police or locals. However, he was never arrested, but he was often either beaten up, fully assaulted, or pushed out of the area by residents who thought he was suspicious. Over the next couple of years, Moskvin embarked on the pilgrimage covering over 752 cemeteries on foot, and after completing this commission, he became a recluse and turned to freelance articles as his main source of income. He would sleep in haystacks, abandoned buildings, and even coffins, approaching his work with an intensity that few people understood. Alexei Yeskin, an editor of Necrologies, a weekly paper Moskvin contributed to, later described his work as unique and priceless, though it remained unpublished. As Moskvin documented graves and memorials, his fascination with the cemeteries deepened into something more obsessive. His nightly vigils over graves and meticulous documentation, while initially tolerated, hinted at unsettling attachment to the dead. At home, Moskvin led a closeted life with his parents, who, though loving and supportive, knew little about the full extent of his nighttime actions. The apartment was a curious place filled to the brim with books, artifacts, and an extensive collection of dolls that his parents assumed were simply another quirk of his academic interests. Despite their close quarters, Moskvin's parents remained largely unaware of his deeper obsession and were shocked when the truth came to light. His mother would later say that she had noticed strange smells in the apartment, but Moskvin dismissed her concerns, attributing them to his vast book collection. Unbeknownst to his parents, these dolls that were scattered around the apartment were not mere toys, but were in fact mummified corpses, each dressed in colourful clothes and wigs, posed on shelves, sofas, and in small corners of the extremely cluttered home. For years, Moskvin's parents had been living surrounded by the remains, unaware of the grim reality that filled their home. So how did the grisly discovery come out? Well, in 2009, families in Novgorod began noticing that graves were being desecrated, with some graves being dug up completely. Initially, investigators suspected that extremist groups were responsible for the vandalism, and the Russian Interior Ministry assigned a specialist detective to investigate. Russian Interior Ministry spokesman told CNN that initially our leading theory was that it was being done by some extremist organisations. We decided to beef up our police units and set up groups composed of our most experienced detectives who specialise in extremist crimes. But for nearly 2 years, the Interior Ministry's leads went nowhere. Graves continued to be desecrated and no one knew why. Then a break in the investigation came following a terrorist attack at an airport in Moscow in 2011. Shortly afterward, authorities heard reports of Muslim graves being desecrated, and investigators were led to a cemetery where authorities caught Moskvin painting over Muslim gravestones in a cemetery. They then searched his home, leading to a discovery that would horrify the nation. Moskvin cooperated with the investigators. They found that he had been making dolls for over 10 years. He also kept a list of their birthdays, photographs and nameplates from the grave sites, which helped in the victim identifications later on as well. The police found 26 mummified bodies arranged like life-size dolls in Moskvin's apartment, dressed in children's clothes and posed in various parts of the flat. Police video footage revealed a disturbing scene of corpses propped up on chairs, resting on shelves, and seated beside piles of books. Moskvin had preserved the bodies using a mixture of salt and baking soda, then dressed them and applied masks and wigs to create the illusion of living dolls. They wore fine and varied clothing. Some wore knee-high boots, others had makeup on over their faces that Moskvin had covered in fabric. He had also hidden their hands in fabric, except these were of course not dolls. They were mummified corpses of human children. For the families of the deceased, the revelation was devastating. They had buried their loved ones, believing they were at rest, only to learn that their children's remains had been removed from their graves and kept in Moskvin's apartment. For many parents, it was as if they had lost their children all over again. One mother, speaking to the press, expressed her anguish, saying it felt as if he had taken her twice. Another father described the situation as a nightmare, stating that he could not understand why anyone would do such a thing. When police moved one of the bodies, the body played music as if on cue. Inside the chests of many of the dolls, Moskvin had embedded music boxes. There were also photographs and plaques taken off the gravestones, doll-making manuals and maps of local cemeteries thrown about the apartment. Police even discovered that clothes worn by the mummified corpses were the clothes in which they were buried in. There were also personal belongings and clothes inside some of the mummies. One mummy had a piece of her own gravestone with her name scrawled on it inside her body. Another one contained a hospital tag with the date and the cause of the girl's death. A dried human heart was found inside a third body. The horror and heartbreak experienced by these families were compounded by the violation and sacred trust and privacy that comes with burials. They had to reconcile with the disturbing fact that for years they had unwittingly lived with the thought of their children's remains under the care of a stranger who saw them as dolls. For some parents, the experience left them in a perpetual state of loss with no way to restore the dignity that had been taken from their loved ones. Anatoly Moskvin admitted that he would stuff the decayed corpses with rags. Then he would wrap nylon tights around their faces or fashion dolls' faces onto them. He would also insert buttons or toy eyes into the girls' eye sockets so that they could, quote, watch cartoons with him. Moskvin said that he mostly loved the girls, though there were a few dolls in his garage that he claimed to have grown a dislike to. He said he dug up the graves of girls because he was lonely. He said he was single and his biggest dream was to have children. However, the Russian adoption agencies wouldn't let him adopt a child because he didn't make enough money. Perhaps that was for the best, judging by the condition of his packed apartment and psychotic obsession with dead people. Once he had removed a body, Moskvin would either hide them in a mausoleum where he would prepare them for mummification or transport the body back to his apartment. Moskvin told the police that he hoped to remove the bodies and take them back to a warm, comfortable environment such as his home, which would make their spirits feel more comfortable so they would be more willing to speak to him. Plus, it would be easier for him to hear them when they were not buried underground. The process in which Moskvin worked to keep the dolls at his home began at either a secret location to his apartment or in the apartment. It is at these places where he would begin the mummification process of using the salt and baking soda. He would either leave them in his secret locations to, quote, dry out, or he would let them dry out at his home. This was because his parents would often vacate their home for several months at a time to a summer cottage, leaving enough time for Moskvin to prepare his bodies. Once the bodies were mummified, he would wrap and dress them back in the clothes they were buried in, put makeup on them, and stick toy eyes to their faces so they could watch the cartoons with him. Moskvin told the investigators that he would place the nylon tights over their faces and stuff their bodies with rags to make sure that they maintained their shape and softness. Moskvin believed that if the bodies of the deceased were left to rot, the spirits would be angry and trapped within an ugly, decaying body. Moskvin added that he had done what he did because he was waiting for science to find a way to bring the dead back to life, and in the meantime he used a simple solution of the salt and baking soda to preserve them while he waits. In the aftermath of his arrest, Moskvin claimed that he was driven by empathy for the deceased. Drawing on his study of Celtic rituals, Moskvin believed that he could communicate with the dead by sleeping on their graves. He began exhuming bodies, convinced he was rescuing the spirits of children who called to him. Over time, it became more physically demanding to sleep on graves, and he began bringing the bodies to his apartment where he created his dolls that he saw as his own children. Moskvin's desire to care for these children stemmed in part from an unfulfilled wish to have a family of his own. His attempts to adopt a child had been denied due to his income and that he was a single adult, leaving him with a sense of loss that he attempted to fill with these exhumed, quote, dolls. Moskvin would celebrate their birthdays, sing songs, and even hold holiday gatherings, seeing himself as a father figure. Moskvin insisted that his motivations were purely paternal, denying any sexual interest and stating that he only wished to give the spirits a safe home. His actions, however, left the families feeling violated, describing his behaviour as monstrous and unforgivable. In all, authorities discovered 29 life-size dolls in Anatoly Moskvin's apartment. They ranged in age from 3 years old all the way up to 25. One corpse he had kept for nearly 9 years. Moskvin was charged with a dozen crimes, all of which dealt with the desecration of graves. The Russian media called him the Lord of the Mummies and the Perfumer, after the Patrick Suskind's novel Perfume. In court, Moskvin confessed to 44 counts of abusing graves and dead bodies. He said to the victims' parents, "You abandoned your girls and I brought them home and warmed them up." Moskvin was ultimately diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and deemed unfit to stand trial. The Leninsky District Court sentenced him to indefinite psychiatric care rather than imprisonment, a verdict that left many families feeling that justice had not been served. They struggled to understand how a man who had desecrated their children's graves would not face legal punishment. As one father said, he should be held accountable for what he did, and a hospital isn't punishment enough. Moskvin's parents too were left to grapple with the horror of his actions. They had supported him, unaware of the secret he was keeping within their home. His mother admitted feeling responsible, haunted by the idea that they had lived amongst these exhumed bodies without realising it. His friends and neighbours distanced themselves, and Moskvin's parents were left in isolation, trying to make sense of the son they thought they knew. His mother, who was then 76 years old, said, "We saw these dolls, but we did not suspect there were dead bodies inside. We thought it was his hobby to make such dolls and did not see anything wrong with it." The neighbours were shocked. They said the renowned historian was quiet and that Moskvin's parents were nice people. Sure, a rancid smell emanated from his apartment whenever the door was opened, but a neighbour chalked that up to the stink of something that rots in the basement of all local buildings. Moskvin's editor Alexei at Necrologies didn't think anything of the writer's eccentricities. He said many of his articles enlightened his central interest in the deceased young women, which I took for romantic and somewhat childish fantasies, the talented writer emphasised. He described the historian to have quirks, but would not have imagined that one such quirk included the mummification of 29 young women and girls. So will Anatoly Moskvin ever be released from the psychiatric hospital? Well, in September 2018, he was faced with the opportunity to continue psychiatric treatment in his own home. Until that date, courts have repeatedly refused to release him, but psychiatric medics are now reporting to insist that there is no medical reason to keep him in secure accommodation. Multiple reports say a new diagnosis aims to end his incarceration in a special hospital which has lasted more than 10 years. He is now categorised as incapacitated, which means he could live with friends or relatives or in a care institution which does not lock him up. However, the victims' families think otherwise. The corpse of murder victim, Olga Chardimova, aged 10 when she died, was one of the 29 that he dug up and mummified. This included putting a music box in her chest. Her mother, Natalia Chardimova, did not realise on her regular visits to see her daughter's gravesite that her coffin was empty because Moskvin had stolen Olga's body for his sick collection. Natalia would visit her daughter's grave daily and was even in the process of painting a fence around the grave. As she would arrive to visit her child, she would find stuffed animals left as gifts, as well as notes signed by D.A., meaning Dobry Angel or Kind Angel, as this is how Moskvin viewed himself. The notes would contain things such as congratulating her on public holidays and even keeping track of what school year she would be in. He would also leave decorations on her grave for New Year's and refer to her in his notes as Little Lady. Olga had a tragic death. She was abducted by a drug addict with the intention to steal her earrings and other belongings, but when Olga tried to escape, the drug addict hit her over the head with a metal pole, and her body was not found for 5 months afterwards. Natalia believes Moskvin should stay locked up for the rest of his life. She says, "This creature brought fear and terror and panic into my life. I shudder to think that he would have freedom to go wherever he wants. Neither my family nor the families of the other victims will be able to sleep peacefully. He needs to be kept under surveillance, and I insist on a life sentence. Only under medical supervision without the right of free movement." This latest news about releasing him is certainly not good, she continued. "I am also very afraid that he will go back to his old ways, and I have no faith in his recovery. He's a fanatic, and it will be very hard for us, God forbid, to go through those events one more time, if he again finds the place that she was reburied. My health is failing me, and I don't think I can face this. I do not want tragic events. Life is tough anyway now." Natalia has consistently opposed his release and said, "This creature brought fear and terror and panic into our lives. He is grotesque and abuses dead children. I would be happy to know that he will spend the rest of his life in the hospital." Olga's mother, Natalia, has already lived through the agony of not knowing where her daughter has been for 5 months when she disappeared. Then she learned that her daughter had been snatched away from her once again. Natalia buried her daughter for a second time in an unmarked grave to ensure she would be left to rest in peace. Local prosecutors agree with Natalia, even though psychiatrists say Moskvin is now in his early 50s and he's improving. Since his prosecution, several of Moskvin's colleagues quit their collaboration with him. His parents live in utter isolation as their community ostracizes them. His mother suggested that she and her husband perhaps just kill themselves, but her husband refused. Both are in an unhealthy condition. Moskvin allegedly told authorities not to bother reburying the girls too deeply, as he will simply unbury them when he is released. "I still find it hard to grasp the scale of his sickening work, but for 9 years he was living with my mummified daughter in his bedroom," said Natalia Chardimova. "I had her for 10 years and he had her for 9. One online commentator called Anna Perova said, "I am shocked if they release him. His doctors can't all be idiots to release him. Let's release all mad people and be afraid. Society needs them so much," she continued. "There are plenty of people on the run who we still need to catch, and here is one we've caught who is to be released." Moskvin has now refused to apologise to the parents during the hearing in which he sought to be released from the psychiatric hospital to care for his elderly mother and live with a new girlfriend, according to the outlet. "These girls are girls. There are no parents in my view. I don't know any of them," he said. "Besides, they buried their daughters, and this is where I believe their rights over them finished." He added, "So no, I would not apologise." Moskvin, who worked as a translator for Red Army intelligence during the Soviet era before writing several history books, also said that he wants to teach English to school children upon his release. In 2019, the psychiatric facility where he lives petitioned for his release, saying that he was all better, or better enough anyway, but he was denied release and remains in custody to this day. It is not known if Moskvin will ever be released, and he's also petitioned to be released in order to marry a woman he's had a long-distance relationship with while in the medical care. Moskvin's mother claimed after a 2020 decision against releasing him that the court was biased against her son, who was not able to be in society, work or get married. By now you're probably thinking, this case of Anatoly Moskvin reminds you of a similar and more infamous case. Karl Tanzer, also known as Count Karl von Kossel, was a German-born radiology technologist in the United States. Karl Tanzer developed an obsession with a young Cuban-American tuberculosis patient called Elena. After her death, Tanzer exhumed her body and lived with her for several years, attempting to preserve her using various methods. So let's go into Karl Tanzer's life. He was born on February 8, 1877 in Germany. He had a peculiar childhood, which marked by visions of a deceased ancestor, Countess Anna Constantina von Kossel, who he claimed showed him the face of his true love. Tanzer moved to Australia before World War I, where he was interned in a concentration camp due to his German heritage. After the war, he returned to Germany and married a lady called Doris. They had 2 children. In 1926, Tanzer immigrated to the United States, settling in Florida, later taking a job as a radiology technician for the Marine Hospital in Key West. In 1930, Tanzer met Maria Elena Milagro de Hoyos, a beautiful young woman who was a patient at the hospital where he worked. Elena was suffering from tuberculosis, a disease that at that time was fatal. Tanzer became infatuated with her, believing she was the woman from his visions. Despite his efforts to treat her with various unconventional methods, Elena succumbed to the disease on October the 25th, 1931. Tanzer's obsession with Elena did not end with her death. He paid for her funeral and commissioned the construction of an elaborate mausoleum in Key West Cemetery, where he visited her body almost every night. In April 1933, Tanzer secretly exhumed Elena's body and brought it to his home. Over the next 7 years, he attempted to preserve her corpse using various methods, including wiring her bones together, replacing her skin with wax and silk, and stuffing her body with rags to maintain her shape. In 1940, Elena's family became suspicious and discovered Tanzer's activities. Authorities were alerted and Tanzer was arrested. The case shocked the community and garnered widespread media attention. Despite the grotesque nature of his actions, Tanzer was not prosecuted because the statute of limitations for his crimes had expired. Therefore, he was released and lived the remainder of his life in relative obscurity, passing away on the 3rd of July 1952. Karl Tanzer's case continues to captivate and disturb, serving as a reminder of the extremes to which obsession can drive an individual. If you're still with me, thank you for joining me on this chilling journey into the life and crimes of Anatoly Moskvin. His story is a haunting memento of how brilliant minds can be consumed by dark obsessions, leading to unimaginable acts. As we close this episode, we reflect on the thin lines between genius and madness and the importance of understanding the psychological depths that drive such behaviours. Thank you for joining me on this journey onto the dark secrets of Anatoly Moskvin, the human doll maker. If you found this episode compelling, please make sure to follow Jane Doe's Dark Secrets for more true crime stories that uncover the hidden truths behind some of the world's most chilling cases. And don't forget to join me on Instagram and TikTok at the Jane Doe PCast for updates and behind the scene content. Also, you can share your thoughts on today's episode. I would love to hear from you. Let me know in the comments what other dark secrets you would like me to uncover in future episodes. But until next time, stay curious and stay safe. This is Jane signing off.